Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. All right, today we're going to talk about a very particular bill that is under discussion or amendment in Canada. It is called Bill C-9. It's regarding hate speech. To talk about it, I have with me Mark Sandler. Mark is part of the Alliance of Canadians Combating Anti-Semitism. And we have Rishabh Saraswat from the Coalition of Hindus of North America, the Canadian chapter. Mark, Rishabh, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having Kushal.
So, Mark, I'm going to start with you. As I was telling you offline, let's do a bit of a background into what the current state of hate speech laws are. What is Bill C-9, and what exactly has the government proposed? And I was reading your submission where you had those specific 4 questions and answers to those 4 questions. So I did read that, and then maybe you can talk about your submissions too, and then we'll go to Rishabh, and Rishabh can talk about the submissions by the from the side of the Hindu community also. So Mark, over to you first.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak about this important issue. And I'm delighted to speak about it in the context of the work that we're doing collaboratively between the Jewish and Hindu community to address some of the issues of mutual concern to us all. So I'll start with the fact that Canada has adopted a different model than the United States. Sometimes people conflate what happens in the United States to what happens in Canada, but we have a different model. We've recognized that the freedoms that are guaranteed to us under our Charter of Rights and Freedoms are subject to reasonable limits in a free and democratic society. So we've recognized that free speech is not absolute. Other freedoms are not absolute, but we very, very carefully craft legislation that imposes only those limits that are necessary in a democracy. And hate speech laws represent one of those areas, because a number of years ago, Parliament decided that it was important to place some restrictions on hate speech. So this is the most extreme form of speech that takes place. This involves the detestation and vilification of vulnerable groups, including Hindus, Jews, Muslims, people based upon their national origin, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity, and the like. So, and the thinking behind it was reflected in the Supreme Court of Canada's decision over 34 years ago in the Keekster case. And Keekster was teaching Holocaust denial to his students in a classroom in Alberta, and he was prosecuted for willful promotion of hatred against Jews. And what the court said in that leading decision in Keekster was that the legislation was justified. And the reason it was justified is, first, that we only criminalize the most extreme forms of hatred, and we only criminalize them when people's intent is to willfully promote hatred against an identifiable group. In other words, you can say offensive, odious, obnoxious things, but if you don't have the intent to willfully promote hatred against those groups, then you're immunized from criminal liability. And so the court upheld this hate speech restriction. And so we have 4 hate speeches that currently exist under the criminal code. We have willful promotion of hatred, incitement of hatred likely to lead to a breach of the peace, advocating genocide against an identifiable group, and finally, willful promotion of anti-Semitism by denying or minimizing the Holocaust. And Holocaust denial has been a central platform of those who are anti-Semitic and seek to delegitimize the Jewish people by claiming that we falsely asserted that we're the victims of a Holocaust, and history knows otherwise. So we have these hate speeches, and they're important because, as the Chief Justice said in delivering the judgment upholding this legislation, that hate speech, this kind of extreme detestation and vilification publicly expressed, has 2 dangers. One of the dangers is it marginalizes the affected or the targeted community. And the second danger is that it gains adherence. And I can't give you a better example than to point out a case that's now being heard in Toronto. It's the Matthew Althorpe case. He's a white supremacist. He's an equally discriminatory hater. He hates everybody other than white supremacists. He particularly targets Jews and members of the LGBTQ community. And what happened is he created two manifestos, and the manifestos preached the killing of a number of our identifiable groups, including Jews. And the court had demonstrated to it and has accepted that his manifestos have been circulated worldwide and have resulted in 5 major terror crimes around the world, including, for example, the killings of LGBTQ members in Europe and the like. So here's where we see, a direct connection between the most extreme forms of hate, and we see actual activities that involve violence. Whenever you see a Bondi in Australia, you see a Boulder, Colorado, you see a Manchester, England, you see these various terror acts, they're almost inevitably incited by or accompanied by hate crime, hate speech crimes, virulent, extreme speech that provides the fuel, the gasoline for these kinds of terror activities. So moving from there, you've asked me, so what is this new bill combating hate that Parliament has introduced? So the big problem that we see in our community and shared by other vulnerable communities is we need more robust enforcement of the existing laws. So I want to make that clear. Regardless of what happens with the combating hate legislation, we need to see greater enforcement of our existing laws. And one of the things that I do when I train police and prosecutors across the country is I show them the tools that exist apart from the hate speech laws to address unlawful activity. We have intimidation, we have harassment, we have unlawful assembly, we have mischief, we have vandalism to religious institutions and the like. We have a lot of tools currently in the criminal law toolbox that can be used to fight hate. But what the Combating Hate Act intends to do is it tends to provide a few more tools for the toolbox. So, for example, it creates new intimidation and obstruction offenses for those who are trying to deny access by people to their places of worship. So we already criminalize some of this activity if it gets out of hand, but these are specific offenses that are directed to those who would seek to deny access to places of worship and other community spaces, or seek to intimidate people who are trying to access these spaces. There's no freedom of speech issue that should arise in connection with these offenses. The second thing that the new legislation does is it creates a new hate offense, that if you commit a conventional offense, you threaten to kill Jews, for example. Right now, that's treated as a threatening case. And the criminal record of the offender doesn't reflect that that's a hate-motivated crime. And that's important because many of these people are reoffenders, and you don't necessarily know from looking at their criminal record that the previous offense involved hate. So they've created a new offense under this legislation that says any conventional offense can also be characterized as a hate offense if it's motivated by hatred. And again, there's no constitutional issue with that because you have to prove a normal conventional offense, plus you have to prove that it's motivated by hatred before this enhanced, more serious offense is committed. The third area that the legislation addresses is it creates a new offense of willfully promoting hatred through the use of certain symbols, whether Nazi symbols or symbols of terror groups. And there were some problems with the crafting of this legislation, and the Hindu community and the Jewish community came together on this issue because the legislation failed to differentiate between Nazi symbology, the Hakenkreuz, which is all too often called the swastika, and conflates that symbol with the symbol that is appropriately used by Hindus, Jains, and Buddhists. So we advocated, as did the Hindu community in collaboration, that the legislation make it clear that it's not addressing in the slightest the use of swastikas for religious purposes. And the committee, considering the bill, has already accepted the amendment to clarify that and remove the term swastika from the language in the bill. The fourth area that the legislation addresses is that for some hate speech laws, you require the personal consent of the Attorney General of the province to proceed. That has proven to be an impediment because the attorneys generals have taken a long time, and sometimes a lack of political will has prevented them to lay charges in appropriate cases. I advocated, and now many organizations are agreeing with my compromise, because I wanted to see a streamlined process, but I didn't want to see people take advantage of it. I didn't want to see extremists starting to charge members, and I'll take as examples, Hindu members of the community, Jewish members of the community, for allegedly willfully promoting genocide, for example, by taking the position that Israel is justified in its approach to the current war. So I've proposed a compromise that says that the Attorney General's consent's required if someone wants to privately lay charges, as they're entitled to do, but not if they're police-laid charges. So that's another component of the legislation. So that gives you, there are other nuances in the legislation that we can talk about, but those are some of the key provisions that exist. I've also proposed that there's a serious gap in the legislation and in our current laws, because we spend so much time when we're debating willful promotion of hatred in deciding, is it hatred against Jews? Is it hatred against Israelis? Is it just a political speech? And so on. And for me, the most important issue is, are you willfully promoting terror, the terror activities of groups that are already designated as terror groups in our country? So for me, when I see people chanting support for Hezbollah, for Hamas, for Islamic Jihad, for extremist groups right across the board, whether they're targeting Jews or Hindus or Sikhs or whoever, the focus should be on willful promotion of terror, because there's no constitutional protection for speech that advocates terror activities. There is none. The jurisprudence is clear on that in law. So that's another area in which I've been advocating, and a number of organizations have been advocating in support for amendments to the existing combating hate legislation. So I hope that gives you just a very brief outline of the current state of our laws, and also a little bit about the new legislation.
I do have a couple of questions, but I'll first let Rishabh also make his points, and then I'll probably combine my questions for the both of you later on. I have them written down over here. So Rishabh, you can go ahead now, and what exactly has COHNA been doing, and what is it like from the perspective of the Hindu community of Canada?
Yeah, thank you, Kushal. So as the Bill C-9 was announced in mid-September, we started to, of course, make noise about the terminology, how use of the, first of all, for the first time, Canadian government in a federal law used the word hike and cruise, which was a welcome move. In intent, whole bill was strengthening already existing provisions we were trying to make with the provincial governments and with the city councils on trying to strengthen the bubble zone laws for strengthening the temple security after the events of November 3rd last year. So this, in that lens, Bill C-9 looked like a welcome step in the intent to actually give community more legal and constitutional amendments and rights to persecute the people who are indulged in the hate crime, hate incidents, and in that sense, it was very welcome. But the only point of contention for us was the usage of Nazi Hakenkreuz, also known as Nazi swastika. And it went on to say that any other symbol which resembles or more so resembles this will also be criminalized. And as Mark was talking about it, that the consent of Attorney General was removed. So it, of course, exposed for the ignorant or sometimes willful use of law enforcement against the Hindu community, as we have seen before in even the events after November 3rd, when we were doing very peaceful protests, we saw that police constables itself being part of the Khalistani protests and also using undue force against the Hindu peaceful protesters. So, and we have seen this is historic. And as Mark was mentioning about this case of an educator persecuted for use of swastika, we saw the same thing in 10 to 15 years back. In a Jewish student in Washington State University was evicted of their residence and was also suspended. And for what? That he visited India and he bought a swastika artifact and he put it on the notice board for the education purpose for the community, that guys, I have learned this. This is swastika, which is educational in the sense that this is a sacred symbol of so many community members. But so that is the effect of it. When the popular perception of the things are, and there are many other cases we can cite from the people getting into the heat of it because of using the swastika on the, for example, car bonnets of it when they buy for the first time, or even the temples getting some visits by the law enforcements. Even so, the indigenous communities also, in the moves of truth and reconciliation, trying to revive, as we know that in 1940s, close to more than four indigenous nations came together to sign and give up their usage of swastika under the colonial and imperial pressure. And at the same time, in when it was not the first time the translation mistake happened by a historian happened in 1932. And by 1935, this usage of Hakenkreuz as swastika became so common in the Western world, especially started by New York Times first, and other media outlets followed, that it started to become that anything related to swastika, it just completely shifted from the hooked cross to swastika in the common parlors. So at that time in 1935, there used to be a historic town in Ontario called Swastika, and that itself was proposed to change from the swastika to Winston after Churchill. And the very next day, the signboard was removed by the community members, and they put another sign which said that to hell with Hitler, we came up with it first. And they put up the sign of swastika again. So that was done by the community members who were not even had the symbolism of swastika for them as something sacred. It was not a living symbol for them. They were not ready to give up for it just because some community members started to call it Hakenkreuz. Now we are talking about the 1 million Hindus living in Canada and all across the world. In what we see after the environment which was created after, especially after dismantling Global Hindutva Conference and other events which followed, the virulent rise of the hate speech and hate crime, and basically body count is increasing of Hindus which are getting targeted for their identity of being a Hindu. And there is of course from that there is other things like um, assault. There are online harassment and workplace harassment and school bullying and all that. So when we talk about free speech, and this is where Mark would give more allude more on it. The community's response and COHNA's response has been that swastika cannot be equated with the hateful symbol of the Hakenkreuz, and that's where our thing was, and also the symbols of terror group, as we see that the banned Khalistani groups have been found so easily wearing sweatshirts, and you can easily buy a sticker, for example, from Etsy and everywhere, and you can flaunt it. You will find it on the car stickers. You can flaunt it anywhere. So that in that sense, Bill C-9 was welcome. But when it comes to the hack and cruise, it was our position was clear. What we saw right after our email campaign started was that within a week, Mark Sandler's uh, the legal opinion about the whole Bill C-9 came, and it was a very welcome move that Mark took a principled stand to not agreeing with the government's proposition of using the word of the sacred swastika there, and that got a lot of support from the Jewish community itself. More than 35 Jewish community organizations endorsed Mark's briefing, and that made our job very easy. We were generally reaching out to all the Jewish organizations, and we were working for that. We did that work earlier with the Bnei B'rith when they, leading up to this bill C-9, before 6 months before, they come up with a petition which was talking about finally ban the swastika, and we reached out to Richard Robertson, and he was also very helpful and very understanding, and he changed the wording of it. And that's that. And before, all the advocacy we have done together, ever since the October 7, the allyship keeps growing, and now we are very proud to be part of COHNA as a member of Alliance of Canadians Combating Antisemitism as a formal member. And we look forward to grow this allyship more and more and fight all forms of hate in Canada in any way possible.
If I can just add one thing before you ask us a question, and that is that for me, the relationship between the Hindu community and the Jewish community is really an important one, because I see so many parallels in what is transpiring. And Jews are feeling particularly at risk right now because Statistics Canada shows that over 70% of religiously based hate crimes are being directed against the Jewish community. But we know hate crimes being directed against the Hindu community is also an important thing to be looking at and recognizing. And for me, it's unpersuasive when one goes to government and simply talks about anti-Semitism or simply talks about hate against the Hindu community or any community. The whole idea here is that this is a law and order issue. This is a Canadian society issue. This is an issue in which we have to come together. Otherwise, our voices really aren't heard. And so, for example, when we've seen hate crimes committed, even that are just targeting the Jewish community, we invited Hindu participation in our community impact statement because we wanted the message to come out. And by the way, the Hindu community was very, very receptive to this and has participated in 3 of our community impact statements, because our messaging is from our community is we are deeply impacted by crimes that attack us. And the message from the Hindu community is we are no less offended when our brothers and sisters in the Jewish community are impacted by anti-Semitic hate crimes, because we know this experience. We live this experience as well. So unless we all speak out against hate crimes, it's a problem. So we invite Hindu participation in our community impact statements, and I think it makes a difference because I think it sends an important message.
All right, now a couple of questions. Mark, first for you. Now, as I was preparing for this podcast for a while, 2-3 questions. First of all, why aren't the current legal available tools available in the legal arsenal not good enough as far as this is concerned? From what I've understood, the criminal code under section 319.1, 319.2, and 319.7 already has specific mentions which kind of deal with them. Now, I was also looking at criticisms of this amendment coming from different sides. Now, one of the criticisms that I came across was of a member of parliament, Michelle Remper Garner, and she said this is actually anti-religious freedom. and her point of view was that a lot of things could be could impinge upon the religious freedom of people. In fact, let me tell you, like, just because of the Hakenkreuz and swastika being one of them as the examples, because what is perceivably problematic for one group might be slightly different for the other, and there could be many things. Now, also one problematic aspect that, which is why I never support hate speech legislations. I mean, I've been a very consistent opponent of these things. Is that I'm an atheist. Now, I grew up reading a lot of religion, and religions say a lot of nasty things. They do, whether people like it or not, they do. But what happens with hate speech crimes, right, or hate speech laws, is that religious texts are always exempt because they have that get out of jail card free, because their sentiments are heard. But what about from an atheist perspective? I mean, I'm sure we know Statistics Canada is there. Almost 30% of Canada is atheistic. And, what if an atheist goes up and says, well, this particular religious text saying this verse hurts my sentiments, and it is a clear cut call to hatred. So you see the problems that stem out of all of this. And the third thing that I found out was that this bill that the government of Canada is proposing will make the power of the police, the cop, far more draconian, where there's no, like, from what I understood right now, the procedure is it has to go to the crown has to approve it, and if the courts feel in their wisdom that there is a viable case, then it goes forward, then you can arrest someone, or then you can summon someone. But over here, what I'm able to understand is that the cops can basically make their own calls. And don't you think there is a massive scope for abuse of this in such a scenario? Now I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. So if time permitted, I would persuade you to change your mind on all of those issues. So, but I'm going to do my best in a very short period of time. So let's first talk about religious exemption. So the Supreme Court of Canada dealt with this very, very issue when it upheld the constitutionality of hate legislation. And the Ontario Court of Appeal has also dealt with this issue. And very simply put, the simple answer is that if you engage in such extreme speech that you're willfully doing it, in other words, you're doing it to bring about hatred against a group, you're not doing it because you're doing a commentary on religion and how you think religion should be changed. You're doing it expressly for the purpose of inciting people to hate a religious group. So you've got to overcome that hurdle before the legislation even has any application. You have to advocate under another section, advocate the actual destruction of a people's, in other words, a genocide, before the section has any application. Or in the third section, you actually have to incite hatred against a group that's likely to cause violence, a breach of the peace, before the section has application. So people who keep raising the issue that says, well, this is going to interfere with our religious freedom. Is it really a fundamental tenet of religious freedom to promote the destruction of a people, to promote violence against the people, to promote hatred against those people? And I say, no, the law has been very carefully crafted not to involve good faith discussions on matters of religious differences of opinion or secular views on how religion is practiced or the nature of religion. The reason why this has become such a hot topic is because the Bloc Québécois said that as a term of our support for the legislation, we want you to remove one of the defenses. It's called the good faith religious exemption, which says that you've got a complete defense to willful promotion of hatred if in good faith you're expressing a topic or an opinion on a religious topic. So the Bloc Québécois, which supports secularism, in the province of Quebec, they said, we want you to remove this section. Well, that created this whole debate about, is freedom of religion being undermined if this defense is removed? The defense has never, ever, not once been used successfully. And the reason why it's never been used is because if you willfully promote hatred against an identifiable group, you're not acting in good faith. You're not simply expressing an opinion on a religious topic. You are promoting detestation and vilification against another group. So even the Supreme Court of Canada said the defense is there out of an abundance of caution, but it would be extremely rare that you'd ever apply it. So this idea that freedom of religion is already at risk is, with all due respect to those who put forward that position, somewhat fear-mongering. And let's not lose sight of the fact we already have a willful promotion of hatred section. That's not going away. So if people are concerned about the misuse of the section by police, then the attitude is to do exactly what I'm doing, for example. I'm training and educating police and prosecutors across the country on the appropriate use and misuse of these provisions. And remember, whether the Attorney General personally has to consent to this offense or not, it still goes through a process where it goes to a Crown Attorney, and a Crown Attorney decides whether there's a reasonable prospect of conviction. So there are plenty of safeguards that remain in place. And if you actually look at the cases that have been brought about under these sections, these cases have a very, very high rate of success for good reason. And that is that really only the most extreme forms of hatred speech has been the subject of criminal prosecution. And the last point I'd make is that part of this really involves a lack of understanding of what the law does and doesn't say. We have a Charter of Rights that protects freedom of religion. If one were to go too far in the assertion or the use of any law, whether it's a hate speech law or other law, in infringing freedom of religion, then our constitutional scrutiny is such that that law would either be struck down or its application would be struck down in an individual case. So I think there's a lot more misinformation about this issue than there should be. I think it's a bit of a red herring to say that freedom of religion is now suddenly imperiled by the conversation around all of this. And I always welcome the opportunity to discuss these things with concrete examples, because we see that in the discussion, people's concerns often get reduced when they really understand what the legislation says and what it doesn't say.
But Mark, you still haven't probably understood where I'm coming from. An atheist would keep harping that, let's say, if I've played this thought experiment multiple times where without stating that the thought I am stating is actually from a religious text, I'm just saying it as a human being. And immediately people come up to me and say, well, that's hateful. Well, if that's hateful, why is the religious text allowed to say that? And that's where the fundamental problem with hate speech laws is. Now, I don't want the religious text to be amended to suit my sensibilities, because I understand, religion is a concept at a very different time in human development and human history. And I don't want to get into belief or disbelief, because that's not the purpose of this podcast. But the point is, it creates a lopsided narrative in favor of religious communities against secular communities is what, in fact, my point is the complete opposite of that. Hate speech regulations work against that.
So, okay. So I'll address that as well, because normally I'm addressing when people criticize the legislation, the fact that it infringes freedom of religion. What you're saying to me is also address the point that it allows in the name of religion, too much problematic or hateful speech. That's really what I hear you saying, that it's sort of giving license to it. But let's think about the alternative. So if you said, okay, it gives too much license to freedom of religion, so we'll abolish the hate speech laws, then it's open season on hate. You see, what we do is we're striking a balance here. You can be as critical as you want to be in good faith discussions about religion to say this text is hateful, this text is hateful, and so on and so forth. But nobody's being prosecuted, nor will be prosecuted, because your intent isn't to willfully promote hatred against members of that religion. You are highlighting passages of text that you think are problematic. That's something we do every single day of the week, and it does not subject you to criminal prosecution. But on the other hand, when people say you should be free to say anything you want when it's cloaked under the religious umbrella, I know you don't accept that position, but that's some of the positions that have been advocated as part of this debate. And I say, I don't care if you frame it as a secular argument. I don't care if you frame it as a religious argument. I don't care if you cite or don't cite religious texts. If you preach that all Jews should be killed because for reasons that are unrelated to religion, or if you do so for reasons related to your perverted notion of religion, that has to be addressed because it has consequences. And that's all I'm saying to you. So you don't have to worry. You can continue to say everything that you continue to say. You can be a forceful advocate for secularism. Indeed, that is a welcome part of good faith discussion that is protected under our charter and is not interfered with by the very narrow scope of the hate speech laws that currently exist.
Fair enough, but Rishabh, the problem again for a person like me is, let's assume, from a purely Hindu community perspective, is that different faiths have different claims. Now, the way the Hindu religion is structured is very different from, let's say, Islam is structured, for example. Now, in Islam, it's very clear that certain tenets are there that anybody will find problematic. Now this happens, actually. I'll give you the example of India. In India, a lot of defense for religious bigotry has been couched under what is called the essential religious practices doctrine, and everything just goes under essential religious practices. All sorts of weird activities are justified, whether like activities like nikah halala, 4 wives, all sorts of weird things are justified because it's a part of the religion. And this is where I think a lot of this will get tested eventually, and I can anticipate all of this coming into Canada. I'll just give you a brief example, Rishabh. I don't know if you saw that recent case of that particular lawyer who lost the case in, I think it was one of the lower courts, and then he went into the Supreme Court about not pledging allegiance to, I think, the king or the queen or something of that sort.
In Canada?
Yeah, in Canada. I forgot the name of the lawyer. He was a Khalistani lawyer. So he said it's
got it. Yeah.
And he exactly used the same line. Essential religious practice. My religion does not allow me to do these things. And my fear is that while like everything that starts, all these things start with a very noble intention. All these things, I am never going to question the intention of a person who does these things. In fact, I am personally I have been at the receiving end of quite a bit of hate online. I know, and yes, I was one of those people who was also, and I'm glad Mark did mention that Stats Canada, and it's shocking how much anti-Semitism has risen. And if you look at the bar of Stats Canada, it goes like this and then just goes like this now. In the last 3 years, it's literally, it's like a giant jump. And I know it's happening with the Hindu community, but I think a lot of fault lies in that case with the Hindu community that just does not go and report. And we are not trained enough to go and make these complaints. But Rishabh, how do we control this factor? Because my biggest fear is that a lot of communities that we think are using hate are going to use these hate laws against a lot of our community, and it might come back and bite us in the ass. Is my biggest fear.
So Kushal, a lot of times legal methods are seen as symbolic also. They send a symbol that they send a message to the either provincial or law enforcements and others to start looking at things in a different manner. For example, I gave you example of that Jewish student. Um, why university went extra step to actually remove him and ban him from the campus, because they saw that the gravity of the situation, even though as educational, they saw it as something hateful and non-negotiable. Now, situation with Hindu community is Hindu Canadians and Hindu Americans, by large, the hate against Hindu community, Hindu phobia, anti-Hindu hate, is erased to a very alarming level. It's not recognized. We're just starting to recognize it now. In Canada, just this year, we got two city councils to recognize Hindu phobia. Now, in this situation, and I'm talking about a situation country like Canada, where if you go to TDSB, you will find laundry list of hates which are listed there, from, and rightly so, from the black hate, or from the hate against LGBTQ communities, hate against different nationalities, hate against the continental region. But when it comes to Hindus and Indians, it all clubbed under the anti-Asian hate only. Like, for example, hate against the Asian or South Asian is similar to how hate against Hindus is expressed. And if you have been for a minute on Twitter, and if you have lived for a month in Canada, you know anti-Hindu hate and anti-Indian hate is real. And uh, and as you were talking about the upshoot of the hate against against the Jewish community, the same thing is happening with Hindu community. That recent report, and we have been screaming about it on rooftop for last 4 years, ever since the National Contagion Research Institute's uh, report about the online hate came about. It was talking about that how this very virulent form of hate is coming towards uh, Indo-Americans, Indo-Canadians, and Hindus in general. The terms like Pajit were being used, and we were educating about it to 4 years, 3 years back, 4 years back, to more than 50 to 60 meetings we had with different lawmakers and different departments of governments and everywhere, and it fell onto the deaf ears and in that administration. And we saw that reality, that we don't even need to quote that report anymore, because now that anti-Hindu hate is everywhere. So and nature of the X, and how it operates has also changed after the last 2 years. So, and the bottom line is that when in California, when they did the study of they opened the hotline for people to start reporting anonymously and in any way to any hate incident, any hate speech, or anything which has gone against them. They found out that after anti-Semitism, of course, the scale of anti-Semitism is just skyrocketing everywhere for last 3 years, definitely, and the scale is unimaginable, and it's really, really concerning. Close to second to that was anti-Hindu hate. And as we see, and we see the similar situation in Canada. What we see here is there is disproportionate amount of the government resources, the legal recourses, and all sorts of institutional help is given to the other communities. And since you mentioned about Islam, that Muslim community gets a lot of attention in terms of Islamophobia bill, Islamophobia ministry, and that all that attention in terms of legal help and all that, and which is fair. But we wish that this kindness is extended to all the communities, particularly the communities which are getting. For example, TDSB has a very special clause of anti-Palestinian hate for whatever reason. And if you have been for a minute in Twitter and real life, you know that anti-Indian hate is very real. If it is contextual, if it is a special measure to see the special rise, then why they have, and any institution has not taken the route of trying to recognize anti-Hindu hate and anti-Indian hate and anti-South Asian hate, for example. So we are not playing, and the level playing field is not equal at all. So when we are treading in this landscape, whatever measure we are getting, We are not even in this debate that, how it will affect us, and how, if we see it in a reverse way, how it will be. It is already happening with us. Whatever measures are there are already being used against us, and we are just starting to advocate for our rights. So whatever legal measures we are getting are a welcome change, are a more of a message given. And we saw this race by conservatives and liberals this time for a change, to get these hate measures strengthened. From the Jamil Jimani was about to speak about it, and we saw that he also rose on the parliament and talking about the swastika, and Shiv Majumdar also responded with the same sentiment. And other Melissa Landsman has been long time supporter of Hindu communities concerns, and she was the first one to get the petition of Hindu phobia to be recognized in Canada, which got more than 35,000 signatures, but unfortunately did not go somewhere anywhere. So our job here is to get anti-Hindu hate recognized from the city councils up to the federal level, and try to get the laws strengthened which supports our cause. And that's what we are trying to do here.
So,
That's
so if I could just comment on a couple of things. The first is, I'm going to tell you why you're not going to be bitten in the ass, to use your expression, for the things that you say, Kushal, because if the amendment that I proposed is accepted by Parliament on the Attorney General's consent, it specifically is intended to address the issue that you raised, because the abuses that we worry about are not that the police are going to charge you for the activities that you described. That's not going to happen. I mean, realistically, when we see the narrow scope of charges that police lay in these cases, that's not going to happen. What could happen is that the people who send you hate mail could try to misuse the criminal code, which is your concern that you've expressed, could try to misuse the criminal code to have you charged with something. And that's why I say to you that I have advocated that the requirement for the personal consent of the Attorney General to lay a hate speech charge remain in circumstances where complaints are privately initiated. In other words, by citizens who might hate you and want to try to misuse the criminal code against you. That's why I proposed a change to the current C-9, not to abolish the Attorney General's requirement for consent right across the board, but to abolish it only for police-laid charges and keep it in circumstances where you and others could be most at risk from the misuse or the mischievous use of the criminal code by private citizens. In relation to the excellent points that Rishabh made, I would only add this. When I do training for police and prosecutors, I include all forms of hate. For me, it's an important message to police that you don't set up a hierarchy to say that we're only going to be concerned with one form of hate and other forms of hate. I mean, I obviously want the police and prosecutors to give heightened attention to anti-Semitism now because of its prominence, just its prevalence right now. But the message that I always communicate in my training is that I'm going to address you on anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-Hindu, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Black, anti-Asian, because we're all in the same boat when it comes to the right to be free from hate speech and free from desecration of our institutions, free from intimidation when we seek to access our institutions, religious or not. Those are our rights as Canadians, and we're all entitled to those protections. So what Rishabh said to me really resonates. We spend too much time being divisive and not enough time saying these are the common messages of our vulnerable communities. And Rishabh mentioned anti-Palestinian racism that was introduced into the Toronto school board system. I'm all in favor of addressing discrimination against Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, Israelis. It doesn't matter to me. Discrimination is discrimination and should be addressed. The problem with how the anti-Palestinian racism campaign's been introduced is it has come with a definition where it is being weaponized, where it's being used to demonize me if I support Israel's right to exist. As a Jewish state, I'm a Palestinian racist, according to that definition. Or if I disagree with Palestinian narratives about how Israel was created, I'm a Palestinian racist. Well, that's a misuse of anti-racism doctrine. That's not about getting rid of racism. That's not about addressing legitimate concerns about Palestinian or Arab or Muslim discrimination. That's about politicizing the process. We can't have any of that. And that's part of the challenge that we have in addressing these very difficult issues.
One last question, Mark, before we go. We live in the digital age where social media platforms are full of bots in many cases. I just think bots from Pakistan and Bangladesh have probably contributed significantly in the rising anti-Indian hate in the Western world. And now it's just been normalized, where people just say any sort of nasty things against the Indian community, whether in Canada, America, especially in Canada and America, and the groypers and what I call the wannabe groypers in Canada, because they couldn't even come up with any original hateful idea. They had to copy the Americans in that too. Too bad. Even their hate is unoriginal. But the problem with legislating these kinds of things is a lot of what comes off as hate is genuinely online nowadays. Like you just have to see my just my timeline. Like the more my subscriber base increases, the disproportionate number of hateful messages keep coming up. So like, how are we going to take care of that problem? Because while I understand that this is for very real life experiences and or for experiences where somebody has picked it up, but I hope you guys realize that at the end of the day, a lot of this is digital, anonymous, behind these doors. Like, how are the only solution is shutting down the internet at the end of the day. There is no other real world solution to this. Like, I don't see any measure showing me that for I'll give you an example. Rishabh used the word pajit, right? There was a great analysis done. I forgot the name of the what was that? It was from New Jersey or New York, that area. A long time ago, I'd covered that paper, and they looked at the usage of the word pajit, and I just asked them for this conversation, and I was like, has the usage of the word pajit reduced? They're like, nope, it keeps on increasing
Joel
on.
Flankelstein from Network Contagion Research Institute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Joel had come on the podcast with Prasiddha and Parth.
Yes.
And it was that paper that I was specifically referring to. And what happens with these things is that I accept it. Like, real life experiences, maybe people also tend to be a little less. But what are we going to do about the internet? And this is my last question. I know we have to wrap up in an
Can
hour.
I make a point here, Kushal, just before Mark makes it?
Sure.
I agree that online hate is really increasing, and but we are missing the point that whenever the online hate increases, it almost always manifests in the real life violence, and we have always almost seen it happen. And disproportional to that, as we see all these usage of Pajit and all that, it's not like we have not seen the symbols of hatred and celebration of almost Hindu genocide and Hindu killings in the streets of Canada in the name of religious possessions. We have seen that as well. And Hindu-phobic imagery used in the geopolitical context, for the protests. So, for example, any of the Indian diplomat or Indian politician, when they will be they do the Khalistanis do the target practice on them, but you always almost see that dot buster imagery, that that there will be a big tripund and there will be a big tilak for the people who mostly in their public life don't even use that kind of thing, including Chandra Aryas. And you will see that there will be a bullet on their point where we put the Agnya Chakra, where we put the Tripunda Tilak. So it is very much Hindu phobic in the
Rishabh,
nature. Yeah.
but when you put a bullet, that's not hate speech. That's literally putting a target on someone's back. That's like a call for violence. So let's not confuse that with hate speech. Hate speech is specific.
No, I understand that, but Bill C-9 is not just about hate speech. It is addressing all forms of hate, and I'm just talking in that sense. And I understand your question is about hate speech, but I'm just making a point that it is not only online, but it is manifesting in the real life, and it is encouraging people to do all these things, which is already happening. We see the manifestation of that. Dharmesh Kathiria's death happened, and there was no investigation by police, no interest was shown to even investigate the angle of racism when it was ample evidences were there. And they have seen many such cases, and we share the links too often, Kushal, about how this case has been, you see how they have been talking about it, and sounds so bizarre. But the unfortunate part of it all also is there is no study, even though we are quoting from some things and here which are available either from the past or a little bit or here where there is generic data of anti-South Asian hate has increased 3,000 times in one year alone. So when this is the scale is that much and the manifestation is that much, all I'm saying is that issue is not just online; it is as much in real life as well.
So if I can address the point that you're asking about, which is really there's so much online hate. How do you address that if it figures so prominently in what we're concerned about? I chaired a conference many years ago that was devoted exclusively to legal remedies to combat online hate, because some of us anticipated years ago that the real battlefield on hatred was going to be on the internet and not on our streets. And Rishabh is right. It's a combination of both. But you're absolutely right when you say we have to address online hate. So what I'd point out to you is that we're already addressing it in a number of ways. We're addressing it because the hate speech laws in Canada do apply to speech that's generated on the internet. The challenges are matters of proof, more than challenges of different type of method of transmittal hate. But our laws do extend to hate, whether it's on the internet or it's on our streets or it's in our campuses. And so we have had some prosecutions that have focused on harassment online, because we're seeing a lot of doxing activities against vulnerable communities, and that's definitely prosecutable under the criminal code. We've seen the use of hate speech laws in circumstances where the hate speech was transmitted online. We've seen the use of non-criminal remedies to attempt to shut down websites that simply spew hatred. We actually have a section of the criminal code that enables the police to seize hate propaganda that's online and to seek an order from the custodian of the online service to figure out where the hate speech is originating from. But it's a real challenge. It's a challenge in part because it's international in size, and it's very difficult to regulate activity that originates in foreign countries. That's a real challenge that's probably beyond the scope of today's podcast to discuss. But I absolutely agree with you that if we do not more effectively address online hate through a combination of the criminal code and a combination of educating young people, who are the people being most radicalized by online content, if we don't do those things, then our chances of success are very much diminished.
Well, let's see. I mean, I don't know what the real life ramifications of this amendment are going to be. Like, I look at what's happening in the United Kingdom with this online hate regulation, and we just have the cops running up anywhere across the United Kingdom. I
But
can tell you they don't.
we're not suggesting the English approach. Just to be fair, I made it clear in my testimony to the parliamentary committee that I wasn't advocating for the language that's used in the UK. I was advocating for much narrower language here. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted
No,
to.
no, no, no. I'm glad you have clarified that, because that's what scares me. And Mark, my biggest pet peeves is that such laws exist in India too. It's absolutely ridiculous. I have seen firsthand how the Indian state, irrespective of the political outfit, just weaponizes these laws that exist on the statute books. And what happens is usually a lot of these special interest groups in courts weaponize these laws, and then lawfare it becomes a tool. I understand. Once again, I am not going to accuse anyone of not having noble intentions when it comes to these things. But my plea to groups like yours, or COHNA, or for any group that is working on this is, please look into the free rider problem, because the ones you may want to make this law against are the most likely to use this against you in the long run. That's my biggest fear. So I hope you guys take that in a positive manner, and which is why I wanted to have this discussion when Rishabh came to me. I mean, Rishabh knows my views on hate speech laws. He knows it very well. That I'm actually you know I'm not for hate speech, but I believe it should be legal. I just want to know who hates me, so that I can avoid him like a plague. That's all I do.
Well, not only do I respect your right to have a different view than mine, but I'll defend it to my death. And I think everything that I've said on this issue to the parliamentary committee and to the public and so on and so forth have been really ultimately consistent with your approach, which is that you may not want to prohibit hate speech to the extent to which I do. But when I advocate for prohibiting hate speech, I do it in very narrow circumstances, and I do it with certain safeguards that I say the legislation has to build in. And one of the safeguards, as I say, is retention of the Attorney General's consent if somebody on the street wants to charge you with a hate crime. And by the way, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be charged. But if you are charged, I've got a good criminal lawyer for you.
I think that
One
was
of
the
the
perfect
best.
way. Yeah, I think that was the perfect way to end this podcast. Once again, Rishabh, Mark, thank you very much for coming and giving me your time and explaining this in detail. And I hope that what the kind of hatred that the Hindu and the Jewish communities are facing in Canada, it all comes to an end. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, all the details as far as social media is concerned are there in the description of the podcast. So I have Rishabh's Twitter handle, X handle, ALCC Canada's X handle, and COHNA Canada's X handle. You can go follow them on X. You can take latest updates from over there. And as far as I'm concerned and the Cārvāka podcast is concerned, you know the drill. This podcast only runs on memberships. I don't do any ad reads, because this is how I want to be. It's about freedom. And when you have freedom from government and corporatization, it's easier to have these discussions. So if you've not joined the membership program, I request you to join it. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, this is Kushalmehra signing off. I'll see you next time with another discussion. Until then, please take care of yourselves. Bye bye. See you next time.